All right, so let's take a look at the anatomy of bone. So let's first look at long bone anatomy. So we look at a long bone. This is showing a live long bone. Here's a dead long bone on that side. So the diaphysis is the middle portion of the long bone. So that's what that's trying to show, is the diaphysis. All right. This is mainly compact bone, and then inside of that is what is known as the medullary cavity. So the medullary cavity is a cavity within the diaphysis of a long bone. And that cavity contains yellow bone marrow. So yellow bone marrow contains fats and lipids. All right. So next is the epiphyses. Epiphyses is plural. Epiphysis is singular. All right. So these are the ends of a long bone. So there's one end. There's the other end. All right. So what we see in there is there's a thin layer of compact bone around spongy bone in there. All right. And red bone marrow, and that's what we're trying to see there, fills in those internal cavities there. Now, on this one end, this live bone, you can see here is some articular cartilage. So articular cartilage is a thin layer of hyaline cartilage that surrounds the ends of a bone. So we see a thin layer down here as well. All right. This is where bones come into contact with each other. And it's going to reduce friction here between the bones. So, you know, you're not having actual bone against bone, it's hyaline cartilage against hyaline cartilage, so that's going to protect the bone. Looking at membranes that are found in here, one is a periosteum. Peri means around, osteum refers to bone, so you can see this membrane right there. This is a fibrous connective tissue covering of bone. All right, now, so we see this on a long bone, but this covers all of bone, so periosteum isn't just specific to long bones. Now, the periosteum is continuous with tendons and ligaments. Now, tendons connect muscle to bone, and ligaments connect bone to bone, so connective tissues there. Next is the endosteum, which you can't really see, but the endosteum is thin connective tissue that lines the medullary cavity. So it lines that medullary cavity in there. Now, both the periosteum and the endosteum contain osteoblasts and osteoclasts, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. All right, so let's look at microscopic structure. So we look at microscopic structure, we see these kind of structures here. So this right here, all right, you can see them here and here and there and there, and that is called an osteon. These are the structural units of compact bone, and they are made of concentric circles of bone. And those concentric circles of bone are called lamella. So that's a bony material. Now, the bony material, bone is made of collagen and inorganic salts known as hydroxyapatite. All right, now hydroxyapatite is mainly made of calcium and phosphate. Now, one of the things about this, why we have these two substances, so the hydroxyapatite is a hard structure, right? But because it's so hard, it also can make it brittle. All right, and that's why we have collagen in the bone, because the collagen makes bone less brittle. So let's look at this picture here. This is showing a fibula, one of our lower leg bones. They did a chemical reaction, which they removed the mineral, so you can see it's pretty bendy here. And they did a different chemical reaction where they removed the collagen. As you can see, it's very brittle there. All right, so we want to have both the hardness that the hydroxyapatite provides, but also the collagen removing its brittleness. Okay, so right smack in the middle of the osteon is what is known as the central canal. So this is a tube in the osteon that contains blood vessels and nerves. All right, now you can't see it there, but you can see blood vessels there. And this makes bone a living material. So if we damage the bone by having blood vessels there, we can repair that material. All right. Now you're seeing these sideways tubes, and those are called perforating canals. So this is a tube. So these are tubes that connect the central canals to each other. All right. Next are lacuna. So lacuna are these small cavities within the bone, and each of those, well, go in the wrong direction. Each of those contains an osteocyte, a bone cell. Now you're seeing all these little lines in there, and so those little lines are called canaliculi. So these are small tubes in the bone that allow the osteocytes to connect to each other. And these osteocytes connect by gap junctions. All right, so this guy connected to that guy through that canaliculi, and there's the bone cells are connected by those gap junctions. All right, let's take a look at bone growth, bone development and growth. So bone development and growth is known as osteogenesis. And in both processes we're going to talk about what is known as ossification. And ossification is a conversion of connective tissue into bone. So let's take a look at bone development. So first here, so looking at this picture here. So the first type is called intramembranous ossification. So intra, within, membrane. So this is a process of replacing mesenchymal connective tissue to form bone. So here we're going to start off with mesenchyme, all right? So that's where we start. And then ossification centers are going to appear in that fibrous connective tissue. So this is what's going to happen next. There is that ossification center. And so here these mesenchymal cells are going to specialize into osteoblasts. So that's what we see there. There's the osteoblasts in yellow. So these are mesenchymal cells there. All right. And those osteoblasts deposit a bony matrix around them. So this is what we see starting to be made. They start making bone, essentially. The result of this is a spongy bone form of the bone. So this is the bone. It's just all spongy bone at this point. All right. Then periosteum is going to form around the edges of that bone. All right. And then they're going to fill in the edges here with compact bone. All right. So that's how intermembranous ossification occurs. We're going to start off with mesenchyme. Mesenchymal cells are going to specialize in the osteoblasts. They're going to start to produce bone. They're going to convert that, so they're going to make a spongy bone form of the bone. Periosteum is going to form on the edges, and then we're going to fill in the spaces on the edges, making compact bone there. So this is how we make most of our bones. So irregular bones are made this way. Flat bones are made this way. Short bones are made this way. Sesamoid bones are made this way. So the only ones that are not made this way are long bones. So let's take a look at the next one. That's where we get long bone development here. Okay, so next is endochondral ossification. Endo means within. Chondro refers to cartilage. So endochondral ossification. So it's the embryonic formation of bone by the replacement of hyaline cartilage with bone. So here, the first thing is that we're going to start with a hyaline cartilage model of the bone, which is what we see here. All right? And then chondrocytes in the middle of that bone are going to specialize in osteoblasts, just kind of like what we saw before. And so they're going to start to convert that cartilage to bone. And so on this picture, you see this light purple is trying to show cartilage. The darker purple is where we're converting that cartilage to bone. And then we're seeing that bone development there. Okay, so those osteoblasts are going to convert that cartilage to bone, and then they're going to work their way towards each epiphysis. All right, and so this is going to lead us right into the next thing, which is growth of long bones. All right, so here we have our long bone. All right, and so we see right here this structure right there in the middle, or at the end of that, and that is known as the epithelial plate, commonly known as growth plates. So there's a band of cartilage where bone growth occurs, and it separates the epiphysis from the diaphysis. So if I go to one of these pictures here, this is showing the hand of a child, and you can see there's the epithelial plate. This is bone here, that's the epiphysis, there's the diaphysis. So this is still cartilage in that area that we can see there on that x-ray. Okay, so let's go back to this picture here. All right, so in the epithelial plates, new chondrocytes and cartilage are made in the epithelial plate, and they're pushed towards the diaphysis. And so what this does is that pushes the epiphysis up. So as new cartilage is made, it's pushed down, and that epiphysis moves up, because it's the only thing that can happen there. And so what happens there is that elongates the diaphysis. The diaphysis is going to get longer as the epiphysis moves up. All right? So in the diaphysis, you see in this darker purple area, is a zone of calcification. And that's where that cartilage is converted into bone or ossified. All right? So we have two things at work. we have in the epithelial plate, we're constantly making new cartilage and cartilaginous cells. And then right below that, in that zone of calcification, is we're converting that cartilage to bone. Now, both of these processes are controlled by hormones. And we'll get to those hormones here in a little bit. But these two processes will continue. Bone growth occurring there in the epithelial plate, converting that cartilage to bone in that zone of calcification. What's eventually going to happen is that zone of calcification is going to overrun that epithelial plate, converting it to bone. And when that occurs, this is what you see, bone growth will stop. All right, let's take a look at the growth in bone width. This will move for me. Okay, so osteoblasts here in the periosteum lay down some bone. So here, osteoblasts in the periosteum are laying down some bone. The bone forms grooves around the blood vessels. So you can see there, and then eventually they overtake that blood vessel. This will form an osteon right there in the middle. And this gets our bone to grow out in width.